Hello and welcome to week 1 of my 21-day oil painting challenge. This is a summary of those first 7 days, so let's get started. So I actually thought about doing this quite a while ago and then just kind of forgot about it or never actually arranged to start the challenge. I wanted to do a monthly challenge or something like a 30-day challenge. Turns out I don't have 30 canvases of the same size, so on that organised note, I decided to do a 21-day challenge instead. I'm working on 3x3-inch square cotton canvases, which are pretty small and maybe are a little bit too small, but I wanted something tiny because I didn't want to spend a lot of time on each painting, and also I need somewhere to put them because 21 paintings is a lot to try and store. One of the reasons that I wanted to do this challenge is that I want to try and be a bit more experimental with my artwork and a bit more creative. That's something that I wanted to do all year, and I think I started out along the right track, but recently I feel like I am in a little bit of a rut. I'm just hyper focusing on one or two types of art and I'm not really focusing on everything else. So recently I've been doing plein air landscape paintings, which I really love, and I've done some portrait painting, but there's so many other things that I could paint and I feel like I've kind of been neglecting them a little bit. But a challenge like this is just a great opportunity to paint 21 completely different things, and they can be in different styles and I can vary things up a little bit. So that's why I decided to do this challenge. So now I've got all that rambling out of the way, we can actually focus on day 1 of the art challenge, which was this painting of a rose. Now, let me tell you, this was not an enjoyable painting at all. It was very difficult. Everything that could go wrong with this painting, I feel, did go wrong with this painting. The lighting wasn't very good. I struggled with the reference photo. I took the reference photo, so it's my own fault. I added too much paint to begin with, and so it got difficult to work with in later stages, and I think I was just a bit too haphazard with things. I've looked back on this time lapse and there's a time when I think this rose is looking not too bad. In fact, this might be that time, and then it very quickly descends from there and I overwork it, and I'm not very happy that I did that. I added a few too many colours into the rose that didn't really need to be there, and the values got a little bit off. The highlights were just way too bright for some of the areas, and it ended up looking a little bit garish, I thought. So by the time I finished this piece, I actually ended up redoing it and reworking some areas, and I think that might have made it worse, if I'm being completely honest. So, yeah, it wasn't a great start. I wasn't off to the best start with this 21-day challenge, to the point that I almost didn't carry on with it, which would have been a ridiculous start. But when I actually shared this online on Facebook and on Instagram, it actually got a pretty good reception and people were very nice about it and they gave me some lovely feedback. And so what I think I need to take from that is that I ought to be a lot less critical of myself and just enjoy the process a bit more and stop picking everything apart, because I actually turned out that people quite liked the end result. So there you have it. For day 2, I decided to do a still life of this little music speaker, which is known affectionately as Mr. B. The reason for that name will become apparent very shortly. I really like this music speaker and I've had it for years. I used to take it everywhere with me. It went on family holidays and I tried to get it in the background of all of our pictures on holiday. I don't actually use it very much anymore, but I have grown attached to this little inanimate object, so it's sticking around. I haven't done a still life for a while, so it was nice getting that practice in, and I actually liked how this turned out, so I'm glad that I persevered with this challenge. I tried to be a little bit more detailed and just take a bit more care with how I was painting and not add too much paint in the early layers, and just use smaller brushes and go slowly and steadily and just take everything a little at a time without rushing ahead and making a mess. And I actually think it turned out okay, and I'm happy with this little painting. If I had to be super picky about this painting, then one thing I would have liked to have done would be include a little bit more detail, but I think I need to realize my limitations sometimes with the equipment that I'm using and this type of painting that I'm doing, because it doesn't always lend itself to the painting that I'm trying to achieve. So the canvas here was quite rough. I did gesso it and I sanded it down a little bit, but it's not a very smooth surface, and so getting that fine detail can be a little bit tricky. I also think if I took my time and I layered the paint and let it dry in between, that would be a little bit more helpful for a more detailed finish. So I need to bear that in mind and not get too frustrated if I can't always achieve the look I'm going for, because there might be some logical reasons for that. For day 3, I was beginning to miss my landscape painting, so I decided to do this lovely little scene from a village in North Yorkshire. It's such a beautiful village, and I took this photo earlier in the spring. It was a bit blurry and I wasn't sure whether it would make a great landscape painting, so I've avoided doing anything with it. But when I was considering what I wanted to paint next, I thought back to this photo. I was scrolling through my phone and I came across it again, and I thought, this actually might work pretty well on a small scale, so here we are. I actually really like this painting as a square, and I don't think I would have considered doing this landscape in this format if it hadn't have been for this challenge. So that's one great thing that's come out of it already. I also got to play around with the composition with this painting, which I don't usually do. Normally I'm quite literal with my paintings just while I'm building up my skill as an artist, but this time I moved things around a little bit. I shifted everything slightly to the left so that the stream wasn't running right down the center of the painting, because I thought that would just be too symmetrical and weird, so I avoided doing that, and I really like how it turned out. It got me thinking that this might not actually be a bad way of going about landscape paintings, and if I want to work on something larger, maybe I can do a small version first just to figure out the composition and see if everything fits together, and just work out if it would actually be a nice painting. And then once I know that everything works on that smaller scale, I can try and scale it up a little bit. As long as I've got enough detail that I can add in there, I don't think there should be a problem with that. But I hadn't really thought about doing that until this challenge, so that's another useful tip that I feel I've picked up already. I used to practice and do my own nail art, and I'd paint ridiculously tiny things, and this kind of reminded me of that, and it was very nostalgic, and so maybe I will do more of this in the future. I mean, I don't really know how much of a market there is for miniature landscapes, but if there is, then I'm interested. By day 4, I had already done a miniature landscape, a floral, and a still life, so I felt it was about time I practiced my portrait painting a little more. If you've watched some of my previous videos, then you will know that portrait painting isn't my strongest area of painting. I think that's fair to say. I've done lots of practices and I do want to get better, but it's not a strong suit of mine, so I decided to focus just on my eye for this painting rather than doing a whole portrait. I thought a 3x3 inch full face portrait might be a little bit challenging. I have done tiny portraits before, but they take me a long time and I knew I'd get frustrated, and if I really didn't like it, I didn't want to have to scrap it and try and do another one or try and fix it on a later date. I really wanted this finished fairly quickly for me, so the eye seemed like a good option. As anticipated, this didn't turn out exactly as I wanted it to. It was a little bit flat by the end and the eye seemed to shrink a little bit. I don't know what I did there, but the eye is definitely smaller at the end. But I did learn a lot from this painting, which I think will be useful in future portraits. I started to recognize how important subtlety is in this painting, that I need to be more subtle with the colors that I use because sometimes the saturation is just a bit too much and it doesn't blend very well with the rest of the painting. I also need to compress my values a little bit. I think I definitely managed to do that in this painting, but it did bring to mind some of my other pieces where I didn't quite do that, and that might be one of the reasons why they weren't that successful. I also started using a smaller brush a little bit too early in this process, and I got a little bit fussy with the painting. When I could have kept with the larger brush for a lot longer, I ended up having to revisit some of these areas with a larger brush just to try and smooth things out a little bit because it was looking a bit too fussy. After finishing this painting, I decided that one of my next steps might be to do a more detailed painting of an eye where I work with really small brushes and just work a little bit at a time. It's definitely not how I usually paint, and it's not necessarily how I want to paint, but I think it could be a useful exercise just to try and get those subtle shifts and do a bit more blending. I think that would be helpful for me, and so I might try and do that in future once this 21-day challenge is up. Alrighty then, so day 5 I think we're up to now, and I decided to paint these goldfish from a photo that I took in the summertime. I came across this lovely pond in a walled rose garden. It was very beautiful. There was netting over the top, so it was difficult to get a great picture. I had to try and get in between the tiny squares, and then I couldn't get a sense of the whole pond. But it was worth it. I think there was a lot of sunlight on the pond, and some of the fish looked really shiny, and I thought they would make a great painting. This was another painting that I really enjoyed, and I wasn't sure that I would, but I really liked painting these tiny fish and the water around them. I've not painted a lot of water, especially focusing on ripples and things, so I know that I could use a little bit of practice in that area, but it was really nice painting this and I enjoyed the whole thing. I love the shiny fish, I love the contrast of the orange and the blue. I think there should definitely be more fish paintings in the future for me because this was great, but what I would like to do is get a better reference photo so that I have something a little better to work with. At the moment, I take my photos with my phone. I think it might be time to invest in a camera, but you know, they're expensive and I want to make the right decision. And that is kind of restricting my photos at the moment, but if I do get a better camera or I get an opportunity to take some better pictures, I definitely love to paint goldfish again or a koi pond because this was really fun and I think it would make a nice larger painting as well. So I'm definitely going to be looking for some ponds that I can take photos of in future so I can do a few more paintings like this. I struggled a little once I added the water because the fish seemed like they were sitting on top of the water. That might be to do with the scale and the fact that I needed to add a bit more subtlety in the shades just so you could tell which part of the fish were more in shadow and which were closer to the surface of the water. But that's definitely something I can work on, and these paintings are just small sketches really, and they're an opportunity to practice. But I think if I worked on this at a larger scale, then I would try and be a little bit more careful about that. On day 6, I was looking for something a little bit quicker to paint, and I thought this pansy would be a great flower to do that with. These were planted by my dad very recently, and I took a photo of this the other day in the sunlight, and it was very pretty, and I thought I would make a lovely painting in this series. Initially, I planned on keeping all of my brush strokes quite blocky and square looking. I've done some paintings like that in the past and I quite liked how they turned out, and I didn't want to get lost in detail with this. I just wanted to be a bit more impressionistic. It didn't quite work with the flower. I ended up adding more detail later on down the line, but I think the background worked out pretty well. I'm just adding in some shapes now to the wall in the background, and I think this worked pretty well, if I do say so myself. So I think I might do this in future paintings. I liked the effect that I was getting here. It could do with some refining, but I like the direction it was going in, so maybe I will try and do some more in this series over the next 2 weeks. I probably could have left this painting alone after the first layer and it would have worked quite well. It's interesting doing these time lapses because you get to look back at different stages of your painting and see if you prefer it earlier on, and it's giving me an idea of when I might need to stop with my paintings in the future and just leave them alone. With this, I decided to render it a little bit more because I had more time than I thought I did, and I'm still pleased with the result, but it is interesting comparing halfway through and the end result and trying to see which I prefer. Day 7, and I finally made it to the end of the first week, and I decided to do another still life, but this time I painted it outside because it was sunny and it's September and I want to make the most of that sunny weather. I also figured out how to film my time lapses in a better way as well here so they don't take as long. So but it took me 7 days to figure that out, but here is a speedier version. This little duck was a Christmas present and it's very shiny and metallic, so I was looking forward to painting it. It was challenging because there were a lot of reflections outside. It was reflecting the house and some of the garden, so it was difficult trying to include all of that without getting too bogged down in detail. I think if I set up a still life in future, I need to be a bit more considerate about how I place that still life and what the environment's like so that I can do a better job of this. I might put it on the mantelpiece next time so that there's not as much going on, or just try and block it off a bit so I can get the shine without too many distractions in the reflections. I also think the background was a little bit distracting to this. It got slightly out of hand. I toned it down a little towards the end, but maybe a smoother background would be better in future. So this is my painting selection at the end of week 1, and I think it's fulfilling the brief, the objective of trying to paint more varied subjects. I really enjoyed this. I love the metallic duck, I loved the background of the pansy, and I really liked painting the goldfish, and it's given me a few ideas for things that I want to paint in future. I have lots of plans for future paintings. Not just for the series, but for after that as well, and I can't wait to get started. Let me know what you think, if you've enjoyed these paintings or if you've done a challenge like this yourself, and I'll see you all next time.